Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Just Law on IQRA TV. I'm your host Ilyas Bulbulia and I'll be with you for the next hour. As our regular viewers are aware, on Just Law we normally discuss an area of law which is of interest to you, our viewers. We normally cover an aspect of English law such as immigration matters, family matters, personal injury matters, etc. And not only is it a show where we discuss an area of law which is of interest to you, our viewers, it's also a live show. So whatever questions you've got on any aspect of English law, please do pick up the phone, give us a ring, and hopefully we will be able to give you some guidance in relation to that. So normally we pick a topic, and today I'm going to be talking about immigration matters, more particularly about spouse applications where somebody is in receipt of certain benefits and therefore they don't have to meet the 18,600 requirement. And that's what I'm going to be talking about today. But despite that, whatever your questions relate to doesn't necessarily have to be the matter that we're discussing today. Whatever your questions are, do please pick up the phone and give us a ring. Just a couple of points before we get going. Obviously, it's a live show, so we're not able to look at your documents before we advise you. If it transpires, having spoken to you, that I do need to look at your documents before I'm able to advise you further, then I will ask you to leave your number with the control room, and then we can have a more detailed, thorough discussion after the show off air. And again, obviously it's a live show, so we're not able to take very detailed instructions from you. If it transpires that I do need to have a very thorough discussion off air with you, then again I'll ask you to leave your number with the control room, and then I can have that discussion with you later on. But in my experience, with the vast majority of the calls that we get, I should be able to give you some firm guidance in relation to your query live on air. So as I set out earlier, today's topic is immigration, and more specifically, as our regular viewers will be aware, over the last few weeks we've looked at spouse applications, we've looked at the different requirements that need to be fulfilled to successfully sponsor a husband or wife to come to the United Kingdom. And normally, as our viewers will be aware, we get a lot of questions on the financial requirement of the immigration rules. So you want to call your husband or wife from abroad to the United Kingdom. You've all heard about the 18,600 requirement, the amount of money that the sponsor in the United Kingdom needs to be earning. So we normally discuss that in a lot of detail. We've looked at how we need to submit wage slips, bank statements, etc. We've looked at different scenarios where the sponsor may be self-employed and the kind of documents we need to submit in order to satisfy this 18,600 requirement. But today what I want to do is to look at the circumstances in which the 18,600 requirement does not have to be met. So basically where the sponsor in the United Kingdom doesn't need to be earning this amount of money, where potentially they can sponsor the husband or wife to come to the United Kingdom with certainly much lesser income in the region of a couple of £100 a week. So I want to look at that in greater detail today. And the reason for that is we do normally get a substantial number of calls about the financial requirement. We do get a lot of calls about the circumstances in which that requirement does not have to be met. And there's a lot of misunderstanding out there as to when the requirement doesn't have to be met. And let's look at that in greater detail today. But I mean, whatever your questions are on any matter of English law, immigration matters, etc., please do pick up the phone and give us a ring. Now, as I've said on previous shows, where somebody is in receipt of certain benefits, so you've got the sponsor in the United Kingdom, the sponsor might be working, the sponsor may not be working, but the starting point is to look at the kind of benefits that they are entitled to, because depending on the kind of benefits that they're entitled to will determine whether they are exempt from this 18,600 rule, whether they don't have to show an income of 18,600 or not. So it's important to look at the kind of benefits which qualify you for that exemption. Now, the typical sort of scenario you face in practice is that somebody may be in receipt of disability living allowance, or they may be in receipt of carers allowance. But there are a number of other qualifying benefits as well. So if you fall within the category of receiving certain benefits, the sponsor is receiving certain benefits, then it does make the application much more simpler. It's going to be easier for you to call your husband or wife over from abroad, because this financial requirement that has to be met will be a much more simpler financial requirement in terms of the level of income that needs to be earned. Now, in the immigration rules and in the guidance that the Home Office has published, they've listed all the benefits that qualify for this exemption. So as long as you receive one of those benefits, potentially you're exempt from this 18,600 requirement. Now, even though you're exempt from the 18,600 requirement, it doesn't mean that just because you're receiving this benefit, there's no other requirements you need to fulfill as far as the financial requirement is concerned. Receiving the benefits which are listed is just a starting point. So as long as you receive those benefits, you're exempt from the financial requirement. There is then another step, which again we will look at, which is to look at whether the income that you receive from the benefits and any income from any other permitted sources, whether that combined is sufficient to meet the financial requirement or not. Even though the requirement is not that you need to be earning £18,600 a year, there is still another requirement which needs to be fulfilled. But before we look at that, what are these benefits that potentially qualify you as a sponsor from exemption of the 18,600 rule? I've mentioned already that many sponsors are in receipt of disability living allowance and carers allowance, and they're the sort of more popular benefits which provide an exemption from this 18,600 rule. But potentially you could be on a number of other benefits as well. So let me just go through them very quickly. Obviously you've got disability living allowance, you've then got severe disablement allowance, there's attendance allowance, there is now personal independence payments. And what you see throughout this is that essentially what the government has done is that where somebody is disabled, and not only disabled, in receipt of certain disability benefits, the government has made it easier for them to sponsor their husband or wife to come to the United Kingdom. Now you can sort of understand the logic behind that, because if somebody is disabled, it may well be that they are unable to work full-time, they may be unable to work even part-time depending on the level of their disability. So in order to make it easier for them, and no doubt to ensure that there is no disability discrimination, so ensuring that the rules are such that they don't discriminate against disabled people, the Home Office has therefore introduced this exemption from the 18,600 requirement. Just on that point, I should make clear that it's not sufficient that somebody is disabled or unwell. That's not sufficient as far as the Home Office is concerned. Not only does somebody have to be disabled or unwell, they need to be in receipt of these benefits. Now, in practice, we do come across people who say, look, terribly unwell, I'm unable to work, I've got X and Y, XYZ illnesses. But the problem is, unless you actually receive one of these qualifying benefits, you do not fall within the exemption. So unless you receive these benefits, you will have to meet the 18,600 requirement. So I've sort of listed these disability benefits. They're all related mainly to the sponsor's disability. Therefore, it follows normally that it relates to somebody's inability to work. Now, there is one other benefit which is not necessarily a disability benefit, but it's connected to disability benefits, which is carers allowance. So this is somebody who's not actually disabled themselves, but they are looking after somebody who is in receipt of certain disability benefits. And because they're looking after somebody in receipt of these disability somebody with a disability who receives this particular disability benefit, they, because of their caring responsibilities, they themselves qualify for carers allowance. So they potentially are exempt from the 18,600 requirement as well. So not only do we have a category of people who are actually disabled, you also have people who actually care for disabled people. and the exemption, the flexibility applies to them equally. So you've got two categories of people, disabled people and also those who care for disabled people and in receipt of carers allowance. They are potentially exempt from this 18,600 requirement as well. Now, just a word on carers allowance. Not everybody who cares for somebody who is disabled will qualify for carers allowance. The person that they're caring for has to be in receipt of disability benefits at a certain rate. So sometimes you find that the person that they're caring for may be disabled, may be in receipt of disability benefits, but it's at a lower rate. The disability is not classed as that severe. So in that case, even though they're being cared for, the person caring for them may not qualify for carers allowance. So it's not the case that simply caring for somebody who's disabled will mean that you are eligible to be exempt from the 18,600 requirement. The person that you're caring for has to be receiving certain benefits, which means you are eligible and getting paid carers allowance. So you've got these two categories of people potentially who are exempt from the 18,600 requirement. So that's the starting point. And we do get a lot of cases where it might be a young girl, young boy who's basically got married abroad, whether it's India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, wherever it is, and they actually care for their parents who are elderly and disabled. And it's even those kind of people who can fall within the exemption because they've got caring responsibilities for elderly parents, maybe even grandparents, and they receive these benefits. So potentially it's helpful for them as well that you are exempt from the 18,600 requirement. Now it's helpful because if you think about it, the 18,600 requirement is actually quite a difficult requirement to fulfill. If you look at the national minimum wage at the moment, even for somebody who is 25 or over, the national minimum wage is only £7.83. So somebody who's working 40 hours a week at £7.83 an hour wouldn't be able to meet the minimum 18,600 requirement. Their income would fall short. Their income would be in the region of £14,000, £15,000. So they would basically fall short of the 18,600 requirement. It's a common problem that people do have. So therefore, if they are in receipt of one of these benefits, a disability benefit or carers allowance, potentially they can fall within the exemption, and potentially the fact that they don't earn enough money is not a problem. Now, just before we look at how much they actually need to be earning, let's just basically look at what somebody on disability benefits or on carers allowance, what are they able to do, what level of income are they able to receive, and then we can look at potentially what they need to show in order to qualify, because it's not the case that as long as you qualify for one of these benefits, you're in receipt of disability benefits and carers allowance, the matter ends there and you don't need to show any real level of income. That's not the case. This is simply a starting point. These benefits qualify you for an exemption. Now, somebody in receipt of these disability benefits would be allowed to work. So it's not the case that if you're in receipt of disability benefits, you're not able to work or you're not allowed to work. There's no restriction actually on you working. So somebody might be entitled to middle rate or higher rate of disability living allowance or PIP, its replacement, and they might be working as well. As I've said, there's no restriction on how many hours they can work or how much they earn. So it could be that they are working full-time, or it could be that they're working part-time. So that's helpful to us because there is no restriction whatsoever in terms of what they can earn if they're working. And it becomes helpful to us because later on we'll look at how much income do they need to show in order to sponsor their husband or wife from abroad. So potentially they can look at their disability income and they can look at their employment income. So with disability benefits, there's no limit whatsoever in relation to your ability to work, in relation to the hours that you work, in relation to the amount that you earn. However, contrast that with the situation where somebody is in receipt of carer's allowance. Now, with carer's allowance, you have to be a bit careful because there are restrictions in relation to the amount that you earn. Basically, the amount that you earn cannot exceed £120 a week. So it may well be that you show that you're in receipt of carer's allowance and you are also working, and you try and combine the income to try and meet the income requirement. Although it's not 18,600, but there still has to be enough money coming in. So you show that, look, I've got carer's allowance, I'm in receipt of that. I'm also working and receiving a certain sum of money. Now, on that front, you need to be careful because as far as carer's allowance is concerned, it restricts the amount of work that you can do by restricting the amount of money that you can earn. So potentially, when you come to combine your carer's allowance with your income, because there's a limit on the income that you can earn, when you combine it, there's a limit realistically on how much money you're going to have coming in. Carer's allowance is in the region of £64–66 a week if you're only allowed to work and earn £120 a week. So potentially there's a limit there. You can only bring in something in the region of £185, £186 a week. And then we need to look at whether that income is sufficient or not. So contrast that with somebody who's actually disabled and working. There's no limit as far as their income is concerned from employment. So it's easier for them to meet the requirements because they could go out, do a job for £10,000 a year, combine that with their disability benefits. Contrast that with carer's allowance, which is much more difficult. Now, I'm going to later on deal with what kind of income you can combine. So when we say you're on disability benefits or carer's allowance, what can you combine with that in terms of employment income, in terms of other benefits? So if we look at everything that can be combined with these benefits, obviously we'll be able to come up with a figure in terms of how much is being earned, and we'll then look at whether that is sufficient or not. We just need to take a short break, but we'll look at this in greater detail after our short break.